a la profesora, a la catedrática doña Sara Laviosa, de todos conocida ya por sus publicaciones, es de una indudable importancia y es un tremendo honor tenerla aquí. Y lo primero que quiero hacer es agradecer a Sara pues que haya podido acompañarnos y que haya hecho un viaje un periplo desde U.Bari hasta aquí en apenas 24 horas. Para quien la pueda conocer menos, diré que es profesora en la Universidad de U.Bari, Aldo Moro, que sus intereses de investigación son los estudios de corpus y de traducción y la traducción pedagógica. Ha editado un volumen especial de Meta, el volumen 43, número 4, en 1998, que quizás ustedes conozcan, L'approche basée sur les corpus, The Corpus-Based Approach. Es coeditora con Anke Hübner y Tony Ibarz de la publicación Assessment and Accreditation for Languages, del año 2000. También es autora de Corpus-Based Translation Studies, Theory, Findings, Applications, de 2002 en Rodolphi. Y ha editado igualmente el volumen especial de The Interpreter and Translator Trainer, el volumen 8, número 1, de 2014, que lleva por título Translation in the Language Classroom, Theory, Research and Practice. Sus publicaciones recientes incluyen Linking Words, Contrastive Analysis and Translation with Digital Workbook by Richard D. Braithwaite, que aparecerá en 2014, y Translation and Language Education, Pedagogic Approaches Explored, que aparece en 2014 también en Routledge. Y es editora fundadora de la revista Translation and Translanguaging in Multilingual Contexts, en la editorial John Benjamin, de la que creo que todos ustedes en la bolsa tienen un pequeño folletito publicitario. Y sin más, le doy la palabra a la doctora Laviosa.
Thank you very much, Maite, for this generous introduction, and thank you all for coming. I'm truly honored and humbled to be here in Soria addressing such a variegated audience. So I hope my contribution will be a valuable one to this well thought out and well organized and stimulated conference. So without any further ado, let's get started. Are you all sitting comfortably? Then we shall begin. Well, corpora have come of age in translation studies as in many other fields of international scholarship. Over the past 2 decades, they have transformed both the way we understand and the way we study languages within and across cultures. And so the aim of my presentation today is first of all to examine the development of corpus-based translation studies from its advent to the present day, and then point to future directions. My analysis will underscore the role that corpora have played and will continue to play in fostering, in pushing the discipline towards empiricism, opening a fruitful dialogue between pure and applied research, and forging strong links with neighboring disciplines, thus fostering interdisciplinarity. My analysis starts with the first decade in the life of corpus studies of translation, 1993-2003. The introduction of corpora in the discipline was conceived within an empirical paradigm and came to be as a result of the convergence between the discovery and justification procedures developed by Gideon Turi for the study of translation and the data-driven approach elaborated by corpus linguistics for the study of languages. So the synergy between descriptive translation studies and corpus linguistics acted as a stimulus to the creation of multilingual corpus resources, the development of a descriptive research methodology, and also the growth of a line of inquiry that had been put forward in the 1980s and gathered momentum thanks to the availability of corpora. This body of research is known as the Quest for Translation Universals. And now I'd like to give you a few more details about each of these fundamental aspects of the physiognomy of corpus-based descriptive translation studies during this decade. If we look at the multilingual corpus resources, the first corpus that was created for the interdisciplinary study of contrastive linguistics and translation studies is the bidirectional English-Norwegian parallel corpus created under the direction of the late Stig Johansson at the University of Oslo. And this is a composite corpus design which enables scholars to carry out both constructive analysis and also unveil the specificity of translational language as the third code, as Frawley defined it. Then came another corpus design, the TEC, the Translational English Corpus. This is a monolingual comparable corpus that consists of translations into English from a variety of source languages, and it is used in conjunction with a large reference corpus of English texts, most notably the British National Corpus, to analyze translation universals. This corpus design was also inspired the creation of the corpus of translated Finnish, which includes texts translated from English into Finnish. And again, this particular corpus design was used and is still being used to unveil the specificity of translational language vis-à-vis original language of comparable composition. Another corpus, very interesting one, that was created during the first years in the history of corpus-based translation studies is CORPORA. Again, created on the basis of the model offered by the ENPC. It includes, it is a bidirectional parallel corpus of English and Portuguese literary texts. Now, as regards the methodology adopted, this is, I said, a descriptive research methodology that adopts a comparative model and involves an inductive helical progression from descriptive, interpretive, and explanatory hypotheses to inferences about non-observable data, non-observable phenomena, such as culturally determined norms that determine translational behavior. And so the availability of resources and the development of methodology enables scholars to give a real boost to the search for translation universals. These were posited and are still posited as probabilistic laws of translational behavior. The main ones are simplification, and this is defined as the process and or results of making do with less words. The second one is explicitation. The explicitation hypothesis put forward by Bloom-Kalka states that an observed cohesive explicitness from source language to target language texts, regardless of the increase traceable to differences between the linguistic and textual systems involved. A third universal is normalization, also known as the law of growing standardization. As Turi states, in translation, textual relations obtaining in the original are often modified, sometimes to the point of being totally ignored in favor of more habitual options offered by a target repertoire. Another important translation universal is the law of interference. As Turi explains, in translation, phenomena pertaining to the makeup of the source text tend to force themselves on the translators and be transferred to the target text. So we can say that during the first decade of its life, corpus-based translation studies built upon, refined, extended, and diversified previous research into the posited regularities of translational language. Now, in the meantime, corpora were making inroads into applied translation studies, where they began to be used as translation aids and as an integral part of translator training methodology. As regards translation aids, both monolingual corpora and bilingual comparable and bilingual parallel corpora were used mainly to retrieve translation equivalents, acquire subject-specific knowledge, particularly with specialized translation, and also to produce fluent target text using monolingual corpora such as the British National Corpus. As regards the methodology adopted in translator training, which is corpus-based, there are two main sources of inspiration. The principles of data-driven learning developed by Tim Jones for the teaching of foreign languages, and the principles developed by social constructivism, which is a dominant paradigm in educational philosophy today. And it also serves as a strong cornerstone for the development of student and praxis-relevant teaching methods. More specifically, the data-driven learning method drew on the analytical techniques and the principles put forward by corpus linguistics. As regards design and procedure, this involved the creation of small-scale projects where students identify problem areas arising from translation practice, suggest hypotheses, and then test them with their tutor, who has the role of director and coordinator of student-initiated research. As regards the collaborative constructivist method, this draws on a variety of principles and theories. Social constructivism, first of all, and also modern functionalist theories of translation, Christiane Nord most notably, and also expertise studies. As regards design and procedure, this involves collaborative learning and project-based activities where students engage in an authentic or realistically simulated translation project together with peers. So, all in all, we can say that within the empirical paradigm, which can be regarded in line with Andrew Chesterman as the most important trend that characterized translation studies in the 1990s, corpora engendered a number of novel syntheses in the pure and applied branches of the discipline. Let me move on now to the second decade in the life history of corpus studies of translation, 2003-2013. And this decade is marked by two important conferences entirely devoted to corpora in translation studies. The first one was held in Pretoria in 2003 and was entitled Corpus-Based Translation Studies, Research and Application. The second one was held in Shanghai and it was entitled Conference and Workshop on Corpora and Translation Studies. An important development during this decade has been the establishment of biennial conferences, interdisciplinary conferences, UCCTS, using corpora for contrastive and translation studies. And the third one will be held in July in Lancaster, this year. And this is a very interesting development, a really strong partnership, which it was envisaged by Stig Johansson in the 1990s, and it is still going on, and it is a very promising one indeed. So, as regards descriptive translation study, what's happening during this decade? Well, this decade is characterized by the huge development of multilingual corpus resources worldwide and in many languages and in many modalities: dubbing, subtitling, multimedia corpora, and as well testified by two important web pages, one managed by Richard Xiao and the other one by Federico Zanettin. A novelty of these years is the creation of corpora of interpreted speeches. This has given rise to an area of study in its own right, CIS, Corpus Interpreting Studies. At the moment, the main aim is to unveil the specificity of interpreted language vis-à-vis original discourse and written translation. It is a line of inquiry that was first proposed by the late Miriam Schlesinger in 1998, a line of inquiry which she pursued with her PhD studies and also later on together with one of her PhD students, Noam Orden. And for a review of recent studies in this area of scholarship, I suggest consulting an article by Robin Seton published in 2012. I can give you the details later on. Now, as regards the, what have I done? As regards the methodology, this becomes more and more sophisticated and refined thanks to the advancement of technology, thanks to the availability of a wide array of multilingual corpus resources. And also, an important aspect of methodology in these years is the integration of corpus data with historical and sociolinguistic information. So it's really rich, interdisciplinary, and highly stimulating. And as for the quest for translation universals, this goes on. A new universal has been recently unearthed, and this is the unique items hypothesis, which states that target language-specific elements, which do not have equivalents in the source language, tend to be underrepresented in translated texts, since they do not readily suggest themselves as translation equivalents. Other research endeavors are the style of literary translators, ideology, and Anglicisms, of which more later. Applied translation studies, phraseological, stylistic equivalence, and also, again, to gain a deeper insight into features of the source language text. So they used as aids to comprehend the source language text and also as aids to choose the most appropriate translation equivalent. They're also used to revise the final draft of the translation product. They're also used as an integral part of computer-aided translation technology. CAT tools consist typically of, first of all, a text editor, and then a translation memory, which is a parallel aligned corpus, and a terminology management system. And also, a novelty of these last years is the use of corpora to make translation quality assessment more rigorous and more objective. So we can say the corpora are being increasingly incorporated in the curricular design of postgraduate translator training programs to satisfy the exigencies of today's increasingly technologized language industry. Summing up, particularly in applied translation studies, we can see that the combination, the synergy between a coherent interdisciplinary theory we saw earlier, corpus linguistics combined with modern functionalist theories of translation, expertise studies, combined with the professional and institutional recognition of corpora as an integral part of CAT tools to develop important technical skills, this synergy has given rise to an effective partnership which is playing a crucial role in developing a culture of research in education. Now, the question I'd like to address at this point is this. To what extent have corpora provided an opportunity to engage the theoretical and pragmatic branches of translation studies, branches which over and over again tend to disassociate, developing slippage and even gulfs? Well, my view on this is that the relationship between corpus-based, descriptive and applied translation studies has been open and reciprocal to some degree. And let me explain what I mean by this with two examples from the quest for translation universals. As we saw earlier, this line of inquiry was conceived and pursued within descriptive translation studies, and the results were then projected into the applied branch of the discipline, where, for instance, the unique items hypothesis was tested by Pegah Gujamaki in the undergraduate translation classroom to raise awareness among students of what translation entails. Another example is Federica Scarpa's examination of simplification and explicitation, and this time in the postgraduate translation classroom. Her objective was twofold. On the one hand, she wanted to confirm or otherwise the occurrence of these universals of translation. On the other hand, she wanted to explore the possibility of using these regularities of translational behavior as indicators of translation quality. And she found, first of all, confirmation of the occurrence of these universals in the translation produced by advanced translator trainees at postgraduate level. She also discovered that simplification was associated with lower scoring translations, whereas explicitation was associated with higher scoring translations. Well, I think that this kind of classroom-based research, which draws on the insights of description, represents a very interesting and also a promising new trend in translation studies. I also believe that this new trend, this new possible trend, will be beneficial to both the descriptive and applied branches of the discipline, providing it endeavors not only to replicate studies that have already been carried out, also whether it doesn't simply endeavor to make translation teaching more effective or translation quality assessment more rigorous, but it will be really beneficial if it endeavors to empower students to gain a critical and deep understanding of the product, process and function of translation, so that when they go out into the world and work as language professionals, they will be capable of adhering to or innovating culturally determined norms in an informed, conscious and responsible way. So in line with this envisaged new direction in corpus-based translation studies, I intend to propose to adopt the holistic approach to translating culture elaborated by Maria Timochko as a theoretical framework within which corpora can be used to re-engage the pure and applied branches of the discipline. And so in the next part of my lecture, I will first of all expound the notion of holistic cultural translation, and then launch the idea that corpora be used to foster this approach in two interrelated ways, through descriptive research and pedagogy. The notion of holistic cultural translation presupposes that translation be considered as is defined in terms of resemblances between translation and three interrelated forms of cultural exchange. And these are representation, transmission, and transculturation. I will now define each of these large superordinate categories that partially encompass, impinge on, and influence translation. Now, as a form of representation, translation offers an image or likeness of another thing. It stands in place of another entity and has authority to substitute for or act in place of that entity. In this sense, most translations are indeed forms of representation. There are a few exceptions, the so-called pseudo-translations, or the translations that are produced as part of the European Union documentation, since these texts have the status of original texts. As a form of transmission, translation involves different types of transfer from one language and culture to another. For instance, content, function, or form of the source text. And the variability of the methodologies adopted by translations that privilege transfer is very wide. It ranges from close fidelity to different kinds of adaptations of the linguistic features of the source text. Also, the factors that influence the adoption of transmission procedures is very wide. They may be related to linguistic asymmetries, to aesthetic norms, to receptiveness to difference, and also to power relationships between the source and the target language, so that less prestigious languages tend to accept transfer more readily than higher prestigious ones. Now, as a form of transculturation, translation involves the transmission and uptake of borrowed cultural forms in the receptor environment and the creation of new cultural phenomena. Well, translation often entails transposing elements of a literary system, for instance, genre, poetics, tale types. It also involves the uptake in the receptor environment of discourses and worldviews enshrined in the source text. A very good example of transculturation is lexical borrowing, and corpus-based research has investigated very extensively Anglicisms, particularly in European languages, yielding very interesting results. Two collected volumes need to be mentioned. The first one was published in 2005 in and out of English for Better or for Worse, edited by Gunilla Anderman and Margaret Rogers. A second volume, published in 2012, is entitled The Anglicization of European Lexis, edited by Cristiano Furiassi et al. Now, a very interesting, insightful, corpus-based investigation into translation as a form of transculturation is Menji's exploration study of the introduction, assimilation, and appropriation of the key Western term nation in early modern Chinese language and culture. This study covers 5 decades and shows that in the first 10 years, 1840, 1850, the term nation was translated by 5 Chinese equivalents, which I've highlighted in purple, which denote nation as as the ethnic groups that make up a nation. A less frequent translation equivalent is Guomin, highlighted in green, which denotes the people that represent a sovereign state. But in the following decades, the pattern changes, and this coincides with the intensification of exchanges between East and West. This is the time from the mid-19th century onwards of extensive, intensive travels by diplomats, politicians, and intellectuals from East to West. And we can see that with the expansion of capitalism and imperialism in Asia, the term notion was appropriated. So the translation equivalents in the following decades, which I've highlighted in black, denote nation as a geopolitical unit. The less frequent translation equivalents are those highlighted in green, which denote the people that represent a sovereign state. So the concept of nation as ethnicity was faded away, was phased out during these decades. So the cluster concept translation rests on the assumption that language and culture are closely intertwined, and culture is the domain where human differences are most manifest. So, as Timochko argues, when communicating across cultural difference, it is crucially important to adopt a holistic approach. A holistic approach to translating culture will begin with the largest elements of cultural difference that separate the source culture and the target culture, and this will provide the translator with a framework for coordinating the particular decisions about culture that occur as the text is actually transposed into the target language. And to aid translators accomplish such a complex task, Timochko offers a partial repertory of cultural elements that may be considered to guide the interpretation of source text and the overall representation of the source culture in the target text. This repository of cultural elements includes signature concepts of a culture, keywords, conceptual metaphors, discourses, cultural practices, cultural paradigms, overcodings, and finally, symbols. Now, I will define each of them in turn and illustrate them with examples from different languages and text genres. And what will be evident is that many examples are actually drawn from corpus-based research. So bear with me, it's going to be a long list and quite a number of examples. So I'll have a sip of water first. For example, signature concepts in early medieval Irish are denoted by words pertaining to heroism, such as honor, shame, taboo. The signature concepts of contemporary American society can be equated to the value that Americans see: tolerance, compassion, and strength, as highlighted by Nick Clegg in the speech he delivered at the Liberal Democratic Party conference on the 14th of March, on the 9th of March. Keywords are words that may point either to the signature concepts of a culture or to thematic cultural elements chosen by a writer or speaker to structure a text or a corpus of text. And Norman Fairclough carried out a corpus-based study of the corpus of New Labour texts, which includes a variety of texts produced under the Labour government led by Tony Blair from 1994 till 1999. And Fairclough unveiled this set of strong keywords: New Labour, New Deal, New Britain, business and partnership, welfare reform, which provide a sense of newness and novelty in the construction, organization, not only of economics, but also society in general. Conceptual metaphors shape the way we understand and experience reality. That is to say, they structure, at least in part, what we do and how we understand what we are doing, drawing on Lakoff and Johnson in their famous volume, Metaphors We Live By. Now, conceptual metaphors may well differ from culture to culture. An interesting corpus-based study of Yandin et al. Reveals the different conceptual metaphors of fear and the equivalent konju in Chinese. They discover that the following conceptual metaphors in English do not occur at all in Chinese. Fear is a supernatural being, a disease, a sharp object, a poison, a legacy, a machine. What they do share, English and Chinese, is the metaphor fear is an opponent, but whereas in English this is used to conceptualize the state of falling victim to fear, in Chinese it is used to conceptualize an attempt to conquer it. Now, ideological discourses are representations and visions of the social world, and as such, they motivate action and cultural practice. And I'd like to return to Norman Fairclough's corpus-based study of the corpus of New Labour text. He discovered that the third way discourse in Tony Blair's speeches from 1998 to early 1999 denotes a political program that was neither all left nor 1980s right, and was built upon the notion of the new global economy. And this was accepted as an inevitable and unquestionable reality upon which politics and governments were to be premised. Another familiar discourse in the European Union is the discourse of unity in diversity, is a key feature of Europe's identity and one of the founding principles of European integration. Cultural practices, such as naming practices, forms of address and titles, the naming of kinship relationships, play an important role in constructing personal and social cultures and achieving social cohesion. They too vary from culture to culture and within the same culture over time. Let's take, for example, kinship relationships. Well, in English, we have a word for grandfather, a word for grandmother. In Italian, we have the same, nonno and nonna. But in Thai and in Swedish, we have two translation equivalents for grandfather. The first means father's father, and the second one means father's mother. We have two translation equivalents for grandmother. The first one means father's mother, and the second one, mother's mother. Another example is offered by the word uncle in English, which is zio in Italian, but in English there are 5 equivalents of this word, each signifying a different kinship relationship. Now, next there are cultural paradigms. They pertain to humor, argumentation, logical sequencing in a text, or the use of tropes. For instance, in Arabic, in persuasive and argumentative text in Arabic, there is a lot of repetition of both form and content. And this is a rhetorical device to persuade the addressee. An interesting study carried out by New and Hong is corpus-based and concerns the rhetorical repetition in English and Chinese print ads published in Singapore. And they find that English prefers alliteration and rhyme, and much more, significantly more, than assonance and anaphora, whereas Chinese prefers assonance and anaphora, and the least favored kinds of repetition are alliteration and rhyme. Overcodings, these are linguistic patterns that are superimposed on the ordinary ranks of language to indicate a higher order set of distinctions in language practices. For instance, the literary style of Latino writers in the United States is characterized by constant code switching from English to Spanish to express a hybrid identity. Another corpus-based study that throws light on the relationship between overcodings and cultural context is again Meng Ji's investigation of the lexicogrammatical features of scientific language in early modern Chinese. Now, this is a specialized register that developed by translating Western scientific texts from English, French, Dutch, and German into Chinese from the mid-19th century to the turn of the 20th century. And this was a time of when the imperialism and capitalism expanded in Asia, as we observed earlier. Now, what Meng Ji discovered was that discovered two patterns, two types of overcodings. The first one consists of disyllabic word structure, which involves creating new words by combining existing characters. And the second pattern was characterized by the use of functional particles. These were created to relay the meaning and function of prefixes and affixes of Greek and Latin origin that characterized Western scientific language. And she discovered two types of functional particles: grammatically modified and semantic cognitive. An example of grammatically modified particles is de, which identifies adjectives and was retrieved from ancient Chinese literary texts. An example of semantic cognitive particles is ze, which identifies abstract concepts. And this was retrieved from historical and philosophical Chinese texts as well as biographical essays. As Meng Ji observes, while the original affixes reflect the systematicity and continuity of the development of modern scientific language based on ancient Latin and Greek cultures and thoughts, the development of equivalent functional particles in early Chinese scientific language involved a thorough and painstaking re-examination of the target language body, searching for expressions of metaphorical references parallel to their Western counterparts. And finally, symbols. These are related to the identity of an individual, family, class, nation, or deity. And for instance, if we look at flower symbolism, and if we look at the lilac in Swedish symbolizes sunlight and summer, whereas in Italian it symbolizes envy. And the lilac branch in some English villages symbolizes a broken engagement. Also, folklore is rich in symbols and icons. For instance, in India mythology, Naga denotes a semi-divine serpent which is associated with water and fluid energy. Nagas are ambivalent creatures, ambivalent deities, because they are believed to bestow wealth and assure abundant crops, but if they are offended, they are ready to revoke all these blessings. Well, so to sum up, as Timochko argues, a holistic approach to cultural translation, rather than a selective focus on a limited range of cultural elements, which often focuses on material culture, enables greater cultural interchange and more effective cultural assertion in translation, allowing more newness to enter the world. And, I'd like to add, corpora can play an important role in fostering holistic cultural translation, since they can be used to illuminate both similarity and difference, and to investigate in a manageable form the particulars of language-specific phenomena of many different languages and cultures. And how can corpora actually unearth cross-cultural differences and similarities, both in research and professional practice? Well, I think an effective way of achieving this goal is to work towards, collectively and in an interdisciplinary way, towards a pedagogy that is informed by the principles embraced by holistic cultural translation and incorporates corpora in the curricular design, not only to develop technological skills, but also, and more importantly perhaps, to develop vital translingual and transcultural competencies that will enable professional translators to act as responsible and self-reflexive meaning makers in our increasingly globalized and migratory world. And this is the agenda I wish to set for corpus-based translation studies now and for the foreseeable future. And for those interested in pursuing this research endeavor, I'm very pleased to announce the launching of a new journal published by John Benjamins and entitled Translation and Translanguaging in Multilingual Context. You have a flyer in your conference package. The aim of this journal is to provide a forum for interdisciplinary research, which creates vital synergies between the two branches of translation studies and between translation studies and many other fields of applied linguistics. Well, that's it from me. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Sara. Muchas gracias por tu interesantísima conferencia. Ahora doy la palabra al público. Me gustaría saber, tenemos 10 minutos tranquilamente para hacer alguna pregunta. Aicea y Marina tienen los micrófonos, así que si hay alguna pregunta en la sala, es el momento de formularla.
Thank you very much, Sara, for your very interesting lecture. That's a very interesting agenda as well that you've set up for us, for the foreseeable future, as you said. There's one thing I would like to ask. When you were mentioning, for instance, how to use corpora for the research of such things as fear, or the conceptual metaphors associated with fear in different languages. Fear.
Yes, fear and conjure.
Yeah, in a contrastive way, but it might be in a monolingual setting as well, I imagine. Matter of searching for individual lexical items, or, I mean, could you elaborate on this?
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for this question, which I anticipated. In fact, Silvia, we were discussing this with Silvia to apply it, okay? But, and this is why I come in and propose to move forward and create a link. How can we do this? It has already been done. In the in the volume, in the special issue of the Interpreter and Translator Trainer, which is coming out, which is going to come out in the next few weeks, there is an interesting study by Maria Sidiropoulou on conceptual metaphors, investigated by postgraduate trainees and on Greek and English. And so they were studying conceptual metaphors, and then they were creating on the basis of differences using parallel corpora rather than bilingual comparable corpora as Yandin et al. They were using a parallel corpus, and then on the basis of these discoveries of the shifts and differences, they were creating material, pedagogic material for translator training and language teaching and learning for translators. Okay, so when I say pedagogy, it includes both language learning and teaching for translation and also translator training methods, both fields together. So how we go about that? Investigation based on problems, real life problems. And this is we go back to the data-driven learning approach. Real-life problems and the socio-constructivist principle, real-life problems investigated in the language classroom rather than the translator trainee classroom, investigated with the use of comparable corpora and also parallel corpora. And C, this is an idea of Silvia Bernardini, which has also applied in the study of Anglicism. Some time ago, I carried out a very similar study. So you study, for instance, Anglicisms in comparable corpora to see what they signify in the two languages, the donor and the receptor languages, and then you study a parallel corpus and see to what extent the patterns unveiled by corpus-based research on comparable corpora is reflected or otherwise in translation procedure. Now, this type of methodology is suggested in, we were discussing again, this is, I fully acknowledge the contribution of Silvia Bernardini here, is conceived mainly in the language course for translator trainees, which at least at the University of Forlì is going to be taught for a year, so 2 semesters, semester 1 and semester 2, the long and thin type of course. Translator training practice, on the other hand, is in another course. So it's a specialized, it's a lovely niche language teaching for translator trainees where corpora can be investigated through what Silvia Bernardini suggests, a discovery journey into language. Okay, I hope I've answered your question. Thank you. Needless to say, I welcome any contribution to the new journal. Okay, so do read it. Just doing a little bit of promotion here. Thank you, with the agreement of the conference organizers.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sara.
Thank you.